Let's bring Jim Moore into this. Jim, to talk about transparency, to talk about relationships between bosses and employees or colleague and colleague, and why this is so significant. Why has he had to resign his post? This is a man who, as we know, is a BP lifer. He joined BP, straight out of university. He's never worked anywhere else. He scaled the dizzy heights. He became CEO. As Victoria says, he's presided over the most bumper profits you could imagine any company ever harvesting. And now look, so why does all of this matter? Why is it significant enough to turf him out of a £10 million a year job?
Well, the major impact, as Victoria was saying, is on the value of the company. The turbulence that's brought in at the top when someone in Bernard Looney's position has to go. There's reputational damage. There's perception management. These are all things that are really, really important to your brand. Now, most employers have a policy that requires employees to disclose relationships with co-workers to HR, especially if they're at senior levels. This isn't because HR wants to be the romance police. It's because it's a matter of ensuring appropriate business conduct and risk management. And what's happened with Bernard Looney is exactly why.
Talk to us about what the risks are, because some people will be wondering, lots of people watching, listening will think, well, I met my partner at work, or I had a few boyfriends or girlfriends at work, and, we met in the canteen, it was perfectly fine. I don't see why this guy would have to leave such an illustrious and prestigious job because of even several affairs or interludes with colleagues. Why does it matter? Why does it signify at all? Why is it anyone's business, indeed?
Sure. But there are a number, and you're right, there are relationships that can work, in the office and at work fine, but there's a potential HR minefield here. There's always the risk of inappropriate behavior, harassment, favoritism, abuse of authority, conflicts of interest, especially where you have someone in a senior position, a position of power, who could have influence over the decisions and future of somebody below them in their subordinate chain. Now, forbidding co-workers from dating it's just not practical, and in the UK, it's potentially a breach of Article 8 of the Human Rights Act. But we do need to be mindful of what the risks are. For many of us will have perfectly healthy, functional relationships, but everyone has bad days. Now, if a relationship goes sour, there's a breakup, there's an argument, issues with unfaithfulness, imagine bringing that to work. Imagine the discomfort for everybody involved. Now, if you're someone like Bernard Looney, then you're supposed to be an exemplar for the culture, an exemplar for behavior. And in his case, it's not just the relationships he did disclose, it's the ones he didn't. And there's a precedent for this, because you may or may not remember back in 2019, Steve Easterbrook, who was the former CEO of McDonald's, was fired because he was sending sexual text messages to an employee and subsequently lost his $105 million, I think it was, golden parachute, because it emerged he'd failed to disclose other romances with staff as well. So there is a precedence here, and it's bad news for Mr. Looney.
And what is the situation vis-a-vis, full disclosure and transparency about your private life? And we know why it's called a private life, because people aren't supposed to have any entree into knowing the details of it. So what is customarily required of employees in terms of telling HR about who they're seeing and how often they're seeing them, and whether they're being faithful or unfaithful or what nurse going on? I mean, why is it the business of HR, many people will wonder?
Well, for the most part, HR don't really care. They're only really interested if there's a reporting line relationship. So for most of us mere mortals, we would only need to disclose a relationship if we're entering into one with someone that we either work for or someone who works for us. The exception sometimes happens for those folks in very, very senior positions, mainly for the reasons that we're talking about today. And it's, again, what I said at the start, it does affect the reputation of the business, and it can force the business to take quite drastic action. In many cases, we'll start out with denials. Oh, no rules were broken, nothing illegal happened. But the reputational damages forces them to do something. It's happened to media presenters and politicians as well.
Final question for Jim Moore, who's an HR expert, of course. Jim, we're pretty familiar with this scenario. In January, the former boss of McDonald's, Steve Easterbrook, as we said, fined $400,000 by the US regulator for concealing the extent of his misconduct over the same thing, a relationship with an employee. April, Tony Danker, head of the Confederation of British Industry, has been dismissed with immediate effect after an investigation into, guess what, complaints about workplace conduct. And in May, John Allen, chairman of Tesco, had to step down following allegations over his conduct. So what should a boss disclose to HR? If he's coming into a meeting with you, what do you need him to tell you? How much kind of belt and braces detail does he need to reveal?
Well, we don't need to get into sordid details, but certainly if there's anything that might compromise the business or might compromise the perception of the individual, it's best to be upfront and open about it. The common thread through all of the examples that you mentioned there is a reluctance on the part of the individual concerned to be open about what the situation was, who they were involved with. And that makes it much more difficult for someone like me to give them advice. We're all human beings, we're all flawed, and it's part of my day job to investigate C-level execs and VPs and what have you. People in that position need to exercise self-control.
Excellent answer. Thank you very much, both of you. Coming up after the break,